Welcome, welcome to the lecture, and there are still extra seats up front and sprinkled around. Please help yourselves to some seats. And I'm Mark Robbins. I'm Dean of the School of Architecture. Welcome to the warehouse. Before we talk about tonight's lecture, many of you passed this very, very interesting exhibition that you'll hear more about when Julie Eizenberg, our guest lecturer, speaks. But I wanted to thank those people who have worked very, very hard putting this together, and that includes the studio of students that are working with Julie Eizenberg this semester. And Julie is teaching with Julia Cerniak, our faculty member, who's also really been instrumental in getting this exhibition up and on the walls and literally hanging across the walls the way you've seen it. I'd also like to thank Jean-Francois Bedard and Nartano Lim for their work on putting the exhibition together, and also to Andy and Ron for staying up through day and night cycles printing this. This is an exciting event for us. This is the first of the Seinfeld studios. The Seinfeld studios grew out of a conversation with Judith Greenberg Seinfeld, who's sitting in front of us. And Judith, for those of you who know her, is a kind of unique individual for her combination of business savvy and acumen combined with creativity, and really a joy in learning, and a learning that goes on for your whole life and doesn't have to do with being placed just in a university context. And we had a conversation about the ways in which we meaning architects, interact with the real forces that make architecture happen, which is often real estate and the marketplace. And we said, is there some way that we can begin discussions within the School of Architecture that will help make our students most intellectually agile, so that they're able to both think creatively, understand program, know how to design, and also know how to carry that knowledge on beyond the classroom. And so together we talked about a 3-year studio sequence. And what you're seeing the beginnings of in the gallery are the fruits of the first of those. Each year, we'll bring up a visiting architect who will work with a faculty member and the studio. And each one of these studios is dedicated to housing. Sometimes it'll be housing in a tower, sometimes it'll be mixed use. This year, we've selected as the site that the studio is going to investigate the near West Side, which seems critical now as part of this consortium between the university, community, foundation, and businesses who are interested in seeing this whole sector, which abuts the warehouse development, really begin to come back to life. So this consortium, and I need to acknowledge the kind of remarkable voice that our Chancellor Nancy Cantor has had in making this initiative move forward with the partners like Marilyn Higgins at National Grid, formerly NIMO, and also people like Kathy Goldfarb at the Gifford Foundation. There are also several people in the room like Mark Barone and Dan Query, who have worked to make sure that this West Side project moves forward. They've also been generous enough to spend time with the students, talking to them about the real issues of the West Side, So we're very grateful to have people like this in Syracuse who are interested really across boundaries in what happens to the city. So I want to thank once again Judy Seinfeld. If you would just raise your hand and turn around. Thank you. Sorry. Mea culpa. Both Judy Seinfeld and Julie Eisenberg and Julia Cerniak, this is the J's. It is remarkably difficult to keep this straight. Will all be assembled after the lecture during a reception. And so we invite you to talk to these people and also to the students. We should figure out a way that the students can identify themselves. Raise your hands just now, the students who are working in the studio. Okay, if you can memorize the backs of their hands, you'll know who they are when they walk out. But anyway, the reception will be a great time for all of us to talk about this. Now, on to our lecture. Where's Julie? Here's Julie. It's interesting. I first met Julie in the context of housing, more precisely the context of the single-family home. There was an exhibition that was organized at the Wexner Center in 1993 called House Rules. And the idea of that exhibition was to pair theorists, historians, people who did work in sort of cultural studies, together with architects to look at re-examining the single-family home, the suburban home. And I had curated this show, and I was interested in seeing what would happen if critics got to work up front with the architect. So they weren't looking at the thing after it was already designed and saying something else should have happened, but if they were there at the get-go. We wanted to see what would happen between a kind of narrative about how we use space, how we occupy space, and what the physical thing of the house becomes, or what the neighborhood becomes. And Julie was partnered with Bell Hooks, who's well known for her writings like Ain't I a Woman, a really powerful cultural critic who thinks both about blackness in America and also being a woman in America. And this was probably one of the most contentious partnerships. If you know Julie Eisenberg, she is retiring and shy, as is Bell Hooks. And so I spent a good deal of time on the phone talking to either one of these, but in fact, they produced one of the strongest projects in the exhibition. And when Julie wrote about this partnership in Assemblage in 1993 or 1994, which was the catalog for the exhibition, she speaks directly to this tension between ideas and the thing. And because Bell Hooks seemed to get the idea that somehow theory wasn't part of the narrative, wasn't part of the idea. And what Julie had wanted to say was, it's not that theory isn't important. It's not that the idea isn't important, but you also have to know the realities of life on the ground in order to get things done. So what Julie had stressed is it's zoning, it's marketing, it's what things cost. It's the marketplace that determines, in large measure, what actually gets built, what gets done. And it's interesting that this tension was such a fertile ground in it was, that it produced actually wonderful work. I don't think Julie's going to be showing that tonight.
It's interesting how outdated images from 1990.
I know, it's only 12 years ago. And Julie won't be showing some of her other projects tonight because she's going to be emphasizing the housing work. But Julie's work has spanned between institutional projects like the Children's Museum in Pittsburgh, which has won awards from national preservation groups to the national AIA. Her work first caught my eye in a project that she had done in Skid Row, for a men's shelter. And what struck me about this is that it didn't look abject. It didn't look like sort of a bad vision of middle-class life. It actually looked like a kind of nifty budget boutique hotel that anyone would like to stay in. So it reflected that architecture, even when done cheaply, can have a presence which is important. At the other end of the scale, she's also redone the Standard Hotel in Los Angeles, which was the old Standard Oil building in downtown LA, as well as the Avalon in Bel Air. So rather palmier circumstances than Skid Row. She's also most recently worked on the renovation of the LA Farmers Market, a kind of example of high kitsch from the 1930s, also in Los Angeles, and not her version, of course. And what I like about the work, what I think is important to see, is that there's a material and a spatial invention in all of this work. And she'll be showing some of these projects that have to do with lifelong learning and schools. My colleague Doug Bicklin has asked Julie Eisenberg to speak about new school buildings for his series of lectures at the School of Ed, and that'll be later on this semester as well. So thinking back to what Julie had written about 14 years ago in Assemblage, to what she's written in her current book, which is entitled, tellingly I think, Architecture Isn't Just for Special Occasions. Julie speaks, I think, in a compelling way about America and America's cities, that they're beginning to fill in, but they're yet a work in progress. And we see this work in progress, a condition which exists across the country. Certainly what we have here in Syracuse is an example of what architecture can begin to do in contexts which were often thought of as marginal and without value. Julie's projects are positive and help to participate in this change, and I'm looking forward to seeing the work of Living Arrangements. Julie.
Lights, please. Oh, I have a loud voice, so you didn't know the difference, I think. Is that better? Yeah. Thanks for coming. Although you were looking for a place that was warm inside, I can tell. Judith, I've got to thank you. We've been having a blast for the beginning of the semester. We're a little tired, and all the students are a little tired, but it gave us opportunity to think about things in a way that I wanted to add to the sort of pedagogical discourse, and the students have done a great job. But you'll have to evaluate that for yourselves. That's outside. But what I want to talk to you is about values. You know, what am I about? I mean, Mark's given you his idea, but he's a good friend. You never know. But I think expectations need to change. And its places for daily activity should be highly valued. More importantly, people can have more than they think. We expect great qualities in buildings like museums. Should we also expect them in places for everyday living? And most importantly, an individual's self-image is based on the quality of his or her daily life. I mean, in essence, we build for people. And sometimes it's easy to forget. She's fantastic. Well, she is too. And as you can understand it, that's what inspired this idea of architecture isn't just for special occasions. I guess I'll kind of get started. That's the inside of our heads. It's about trying to reposition architecture away from Miss Hook's idea of a theory and a sort of deliberate intention to an acknowledgement of the messiness of life and ideas and architecture as an exploration. And for me, my voyeuristic passion about watching other people do stuff, which I think is pushing me to say this observation factor is really key and understood and underused as a way of making strategic change that allows you to break conventions and allows you to have a better quality of life. People have been sending me ideas of things to add that you need to add, like wine after dinner is not on this list and should be. We saw 3 core values working with communities. One is trust. So I've given you an example of the 3 core categories of trust, ease, and fit. So I just picked one from each category to give you an idea of what that means. You can't work with people if they don't trust you. And there are lots of kinds of trust. There's the explicit trust that comes through community meeting processes, like for the West Hollywood Community Center, where they had this really delightful, if you like tacky Spanish, community center set back into a park, very limited budget, and they wanted to make a community center, one for teens, one for seniors, and they had, as I said, very little money. I'll keep saying very little money because it was the overriding thing. We worked with a community group that was advising the city, had a structured process with input. I think there were 5 or 10 meetings. And what happened was, together, we came up with another way of thinking about the project. If we ever get to West Hollywood and to Plummer Park, it's Santa Monica Boulevard is here, and tucked away back here, the Russian community has taken over the park, and it's like their big backyard. And it's fabulous. And here was the community center. This is the old building, a pretty tawdry and sort of formal place that we wanted to make exuberant and free-spirited. And together with that community group, we came up with the idea of not just having a senior center and a teen center, but the idea of an intergenerational facility evolved. And the intergenerational facility took into account that seniors don't like the kids to be running underfoot and making noise, but they do like to see them. And the kids don't want to be told to be kept quiet, but to a certain extent they're looking for that continuity that seeing older people and younger people in the same place gives. So what we did was, the teens are at this end with dedicated space, the seniors are at this end with dedicated space, and there are shared uses between, and I'll just go a little further. And we came up with this idea, instead of a rigid, formal, gable roof sort of old-fashioned thing, of stretching that roof and making it a free form so that we could keep the existing building and actually completely transform it. So the roof becomes much more free-spirited. There's a series of courtyards that open off. So there's the senior dedicated space, the teen dedicated space, and then all the space is programmed together, social services, the entry. And here's our friend Ed Wolf, who's 86. Now these pictures were taken with a photographer and we weren't there. And what's really important as these guys come back into the picture, you'll see that they're not asking for architecture. I believe there's an unwritten contract that architects make with the public, that they will make something of value. Not something that, well, we'll put a roof over your head and you can do your program, but we will make something of value. There's a dignity factor, and I think this contract is very important to remember. The senior lounge. Fake fireplace. For those who you are into the authentic, I love fake fireplaces. If I can get a fireplace that has to be fake, I'll do it. Because a fake fireplace is one of those things that you can get people to sit around without feeling like they're doing something deliberate. And any social organizer is worth using. Because you will never make people do something. What you're in the business of doing is formulating the possibilities to make people want to do something themselves. And then there's the issue of the cars. Now you have an issue with cars here in Syracuse. They rule. I thought LA had was the winner on that, but it's not true. You guys do, because it feels that they have more ownership than a person on foot, than the idea of the personality of the city in general. That doesn't mean that surface parking lots aren't cool. That space, when you get out of your car before you go into a community center and you hang around, not in Syracuse in the winter, but possibly in the summer, having that conversation that you want to extend is very important social space. And a parking lot has to be designed as carefully as interior space. And this was a tree canopied space. There's a lot of sustainable stuff, but I want to get to the housing. You need workplaces. And in ease, it's the idea that if you're making places for people, they're not under an obligation. They don't owe you anything. So they can walk by your place and never know that you've designed it. That doesn't mean you don't design it. But you sort of allow for a democratic engagement. People can engage with your building at the degree that they want to engage with. That's our office in Santa Monica, which is another greeny project. We now have photovoltaics on the roof and the meter's running backwards. But as all good architects doing their own projects, we run out of money. It's essentially a cross-ventilated building. We need sun shading on this side, which is kind of northwest, and this is kind of southwest. Fabulous aspect for sun control. But that was the general idea. We took water down to the water table. We built as expedient as we could, because one of the funny things about building in America today is that it should be easy, but it's incredibly difficult. So to make anything you do look easy takes skill. It's a deliberate compositional choice. The sunshades on the side are now in place, and part of the personality of the work we do is this idea of tinkering, the sort of crossover between Home Depot and architecture. And for that I have a partner, Hank Koning, who is not only fabulous with technical stuff, but he likes to tinker. So this is a garage door opener motor that takes these thick polygal louvers. It's similar to the material you have in the walls in here, except that it actually stops glare from the sun but allows light to come through. They're on the outside of the building where they can do some good, not on the inside, if you're trying to stop the heat gain, and they move across at will, except when the motor blows. But hey. Simple materials. A workplace for us is an informal place. It's not for everybody. And it's about the sequence of spaces that you make. It's not, what do you call it? It's not an accident that it looks a bit like a billboard. Because I think if we ignore popular culture, we do it at our own risk. And this is the curtain that got improvised on that back face to stop the afternoon sun. We had a tarp up to stop the sun because we couldn't afford the louvers, the ones that we showed on the back end. And this was great because for $1,000 instead of $8, we got sun control and we got the most incredible underwater light in the late afternoons in the winter. So sometimes what you do gives you something you didn't expect. Fit. This is, what did you call it, Mark? The highly kitsch farmers market? Huh. State Fair Rural. And to the people in LA, one of the most authentic places in the city. And the scale of this place is tiny. Most stores, well, have you been to, many people gone to the farmers market? Some have. It's cool. Now our job, this is the Grove, which is a shopping center, which is, if you like Oz, if you think of the farmers market as Kansas, and you think of the Grove as Oz, you can make a place for it. Because truthfully, I'm over making value judgments about what architecture should be. I don't want to do the Grove. It's too cute for my taste. But you know what? It's fun sometimes to go there. And it's really hard to go with kids often who love the plot fountain that they have and the swans. I mean, what do? Tell your kids they're stupid? You can't. You have to find a place in your own mind to be able to deal with these things rather than make moral judgments that don't get us anywhere. So here's the historic farmers market, and our job was to keep it as the authentic market. Now the problem with the historic farmers market was that its true exterior face was a disaster. It was fairly internalized and it was fairly expedient, so that if you wanted to add all this stuff to it, you'd have no clue where the historic farmers market was. It needed a beginning and an end. However, the scale of this is 18-foot floor-to-floor heights. The scale of this is 8-foot ceiling heights. And our job was to add these pieces and, one would say, 100 little projects around the market and inside that we did in over 15 years, sort of invisible mending stuff in here, that looks exactly like the farmers market, which is pretty funny because they made it a cultural designation, and I know how much of it is our work and I know how much of it is original. But to learn how not to design is also a really important skill, because sometimes you need it. the appearance of design. So we added a backdrop. The project really is, if the grove is here, that's ours. To protect Kansas, we have backdrop buildings, threshold buildings, and then the grain of the place, and some very small moves. The tinted photographs, including this one, are the historic market from its heyday, and the other pictures are the little bits and pieces we added or rebuilt almost entirely during the 80s and 90s. Now, I've got to tell you that architects give me a really hard time for this project, but I think you've got to rethink this whole thing. Working with the farmer's market is like working with blue jeans. Adding modernism that's comfortable, and again, there's this whole word modernism that now is a historical style, but we won't deal with that. Is comfort is not weakness. Comfort is another way of looking at the world. And so these are some of the buildings we added, because we said if the market has a beginning and an end, then anything we had will be distinctly different from the market, but allow for an informal transition to the very upscale Grove Shopping Centre. And so we did our tablecloth building and the backdrop building, and we snuck in big box retail to this, creative office space above, the Gilmore Bank owned by the people who own the property. Next. We did a riff on Corb's sunglasses for the cognoscenti, and from there you look out and you will find Manita, who's been a regular at the farmer's market for 25 years and doesn't realize we've messed with it as much as we have. To make neighborhood in Syracuse, you need the same things we need to make neighborhood in LA. You need workplaces, you need shopping places, and you need community places. And you need housing. And we went, in this case, to a smaller detail as a chair. These are designed to be built in their workshop on the property. But the market can't get their act together, so you can't buy them in the store, not yet. Which gets us to housing. So that's the intro. So starting from the back of that exhibit work of ours to the front. So detached single-family house, which is, as Mark says, how we met. He didn't tell you that we argued as well, but I'm sure it comes as no surprise. What he was saying, which was entirely true, is a single-family house, less than 50% of families are actually families in the traditional sense, with kids. I didn't think it had anything to do with how the building looked to be able to find out who lived in the house. You could maybe get economic status, but you couldn't tell if it was an extended family or a single mum or a gay couple. You couldn't tell. 2 gay couples, an orgy of gay couples. You wouldn't know. The fears that people have about the idea of a single-family neighborhood just blow me away. Would it matter if there was, in that one single-family house, a number of people, a number of groups of people, different units sharing the same property? Does it really matter if you control the amount of open space, whether there's 1 kitchen or 2? Because that's really what defines a single-family house in today's society. It's 1 kitchen. It's meaningless. And parking, because parking in single-family houses has to be much tidier than in any other zone. Because I don't know what the street's for, but it's definitely not for cars. But if you go back, the idea of a single-family house started with the served and the server. Girl with a pearl earring. If you like that movie, that's a good place to start about the idea of the rise of the middle class and the idea of the single-family house. To these ideals from the 50s, where everything was perfect, but everyone was doing it themselves, but not appearing to have done it. To contemporary living. This is our house in a French magazine in the early 90s. This is not my son, although this is my husband. But what's interesting is we're now celebrating the activities that we do in our houses. It's all about the stuff on the table and the coming and the going. And the kitchen, to me, wherever that sink and that cooking thing is, becomes the heart of any living environment. It's the only time you pass in the night. That refrigerator is a big deal. So we set out with a house to see what you could do. We weren't reinventing the house. We wanted to do something that was sort of the equivalent of the crate and barrel house. Not a huge aspiration. We wanted to do it for as little money as we could, but use conventional construction. Now there's a lot of, well, this is kind of the basic premise. Front yard, open space, kitchen core, more open space, bedrooms upstairs, outdoor room, garage. Not rocket science. Now there are ideas about prefab where everyone thinks that if we do it prefab, we're going to get it bigger and better and quicker. Actually, prefab is not cheaper than conventional construction when it's well understood. It will be, but the problem with prefab is it's based on this model is about mass production, but not what the potential of prefab could be, which is where I get to another great idea that Syracuse had, which was to have Jeremy Edmondson work in the Center for Excellence on his project, because he's talking about mass customization, where you start to take the idea of prefab to a whole different level. And this is a house he did in Sydney, or just outside of Sydney, something like that. And what you get is the spatial possibilities are incredible. And this reselling and packaging of the 50s to me is a really dumb road to go. And the idea of putting buildings on trucks full volume is a dumb way to go. But flat pack and the idea of mass customization has incredible potential. So here's the house. This is our little carpenter-built on-site project. So if you're doing this in California, the ways to save money is to avoid steel, but deal with seismic code. So you can't have as much glass as you want, but you can't have as much glass as you want anyway because the energy code kills you because you've got to do those big hefty glazing units. So glass costs money. So you have to organize it so it feels that every decision you made was made because you wanted to do it compositionally, not because you didn't have the money to do it. That's a trick. And I have special seminars where you pay lots of money to learn it. But the real key also is in spaces. It doesn't matter how they're used. You could decide to make this a bedroom and it becomes a student house. People come in the back. This idea that rooms have functions that stay that way is so out the window I can't tell you. What we learned from doing the project on the Wexner was that you need big spaces and you need smaller spaces and then you need outdoor spaces. And then people will use them as they will. You can't prescribe. So I just kind of walk you through. It's about details. It's about projecting how people will move through space. It's about collecting the moves to do it cheap. This is only one step of my 6-step program about how to build cheap. So this is your enticement. Consolidating a move into one small space means you can have 8-foot ceiling heights generally, but still make it feel like you have something extraordinary. And this is where all the money is. Putting in this panel, where you would have wanted to have this all glass, saved us probably $50,000 because there's no steel. You can have a plywood shear wall. But compositionally, separating it out so it belongs to the glass creates the power that that glass wall would have. Industrial light. Start to get to models that start to approximate where you guys would be going in Syracuse. Industrial light is in the light industrial zone in Los Angeles. It's a project on the boards. Troubled a little because they've now brought a moratorium on development of housing in light industrial space. And the moratorium is interesting because the land is completely underutilized. It's not like the warehouse has a no vacancy rate. But as people are projecting forward about pulling cities back in together and densifying, they're worried that they will run out of industrial space in the right place. So they're right to be looking at it, but I wish we'd got this built first. So we're on hold. It may still move forward. You see the mix, you see the density. What was the density of the other one? I've forgotten already. What was it? 5.2, so we've now moved to around 100 dwelling units per acre. And the key issues here are when you move to the bigger scale, not to forget the idea of the hand and the personal interaction of doing things, because the hand of the architect can be dangerous if they lose sight of that. But on the other hand, and I say this to everyone involved in this process in Syracuse, you have to step back one step to do things you wouldn't consider to be personally sensible to see where that will take you. Because if you don't do that exercise, it's very self-limiting. So we get to, what are the important issues with this? Well, here's the deal. The edge is like absolutely essential. Six townhouses with front gates at the edge. This is probably going to attract a loft kind of customer. You don't have money to put parking underground in light industrial zones in LA, and you probably don't have money to put parking underground here. So this is where Hank, the nifty garage door guy with the things, put your parking on grade. Parking goes in here. We don't own that piece. Put a courtyard adjacent and make a positive connection between your parking and your courtyard, and put it in structured parking. Save yourself a bundle, but get the edge strong. The next level, you can see the mezzanine spaces to those, the parking going up here from the floor below to upper level parking, and up again. And then eventually you have the top of that parking garage, which you can also landscape. So the variety of outside space that you get starts to be pretty interesting. And bridging across, so I just sort of go back and recap. So edge conditions, front walks that go to front doors. Roof decks are cool. How to use the roofscape. And then at the top of the building that you can sculpt. You don't have to stay flat. It's the cheapest place to add detail is at the top there. What else can I tell you? Lofts. Now this goes back way before I met Mark, I think. I think this happened 1990. I think it was the first artist housing that was put in a commercial zone in Los Angeles. That was a speculative project, not 1 or 2 units. People had been doing that. Fred Fisher had been doing that. Frank Gehry had been doing that. We'd been doing that. But this was a guy who came to us and he bought commercially zoned land to put artist loft housing in. And the skill here is that it's a 50-foot wide lot because it was an old railway easement. So, students, remember we were saying what can you fit under a railway? You can fit, that's how wide this is. It's a good reference. This is 43 units per acre. So what do artists want? I mean, we have this conventional idea of what an artist does, which is paint, but people do digital art, they do ceramics, they do dance, they do clothing design if you're a Project Runway freak like I am. Which is my other claim to fame. I have a student who is now in Project, what's it called? Designers Challenge. Look out for Andrea Keller. Good kid. So space needs to be raw and manipulable. And it has to be available in increments that change from small to large and can be reorganized easily that way. A little bit like paint buckets. The section here, when you're looking at artist loft housing, you want to get as much one level of open space as you can. So you put your kitchen often up on the second level so that you can get as much clear space on ground. The things that nail you are disabled access regulations that have you keep a bathroom at the entry level. The real brilliance here is parking again. By having multiple driveways, we could get enough cars to get the number of units to work. I've moved way past this idea of parking at this point because I think we're going about parking all wrong. As Donald Shoup, who's a professor at UCLA, points out, we're perfectly willing to pay for square footage to live in, but we're perfectly unwilling to pay for any space for our cars. And the more of the privilege is the car, not the housing. It's an interesting dilemma. So I'll just walk you through. It's just simple stuff running down the railway track. And this was 1990, and these are solar collectors for hot water. For us, people are making a lot of fuss about green design. They should be. The more aware everyone is, the better. But frankly, it's part of our craft. You should be doing it because you should be doing it. Same as you make a building stand up structurally that's safe. That's how you should be approaching sustainability. It's a responsibility. affordable housing in Hollywood. So how do you take it from the abstract and the, what's the word? The abstract and the detached to the personal? You could go see Bunny in this neighborhood. And then, this is what annoys me the most. People so intent on trying to be nice end up being so trivially cliched that it says a lot about how they value the people that live in the building. It's not acceptable. A gable roof doesn't make it friendly. This is a building that is doomed to look like, I'm in a public lecture. In a year and a half. This is not about dignity for people who live in there. This is expediency, and we have to avoid it at all costs. To make a building get the most value you can, you have to work the regulations. In the same way I talked about working the costs for single-family house, in all housing, and particularly affordable housing, you have to use your restrictions to actually create opportunities, not to dumb down what you do. So you collect your open space so that you can plant it. You think about what it is to go to work and what it is to go home from work. You can create open spaces where kids can play. And all the time you're dealing with all the myriad of conditions that the planning and zoning and building code is doing for you. And this is an easy set for this place. And you deal with composition in a very traditional sense. This is recycled plastic and wood pulp planks that make the balconies. Community center, community room at the corner facing Bunny. Bunny finally left town. Cross ventilation, again, it's this issue that if you're doing housing in a warm climate, cross ventilation is a no-brainer. The community space, the idea of people seeing other people and having an opportunity informally of participating or not. A place under a stair is a place to play. This is a really great strategy for dealing with your disabled access code requirement. Don't put a rail, put a platform. Kids use it as a table, they do all sorts of stuff. It's a winner. And using that small amount we have of in-ground space to plant trees and locate the laundry. And I have my laundry story that I have to tell. I wish I'd have had my camera. I went in there and there were 6 little girls who had their Barbies and their horses, whatever those horses with the manes are, and Playmobil, and they had taken over the whole laundry room and had a wonderland. Pardon? My Little Pony. And these are small things, but that's why it's important. We deal with ridiculous code requirements, which we can't always beat, but we sure as hell make an effort to try. The single-line kitchen for these one-bedroom units, which are in the middle, made perfect sense. Housing department of the city of LA said, no, kitchens need to be U-shaped. They would not let us do it. So instead, after being told by the client to give it up, because we thought this was such a stupid rule, we were forced to put in this kind of kitchen, which once you put disabled access, this has to be 5 foot because that's a dead end. It's the most stupid waste of space in all the world. So you have to get your bureaucracy on board to make change as much as an architect can bring an idea to the table. There is only so much your architect can do unless your city and your government want to do it as well. And then building. Contractors think building for affordable housing is pretty entertaining. They see it as shelter. And even though they may be blue-collar workers, they do not see that as an issue where you spend more time than you have to. So wanting a detail, or saying it matters that you use glass that's 8 foot high is an anathema to them. Why don't you just make it 7 foot because the window unit's smaller? We'll put the 1 foot of drywall above. We fought for that one for a long time. We have never yet been presented enough information to evaluate why they think that 1 foot of drywall makes that installation for that wall cheaper. Because the time it takes to do all that additional work and the trades, there's 3 trades involved. There's the studs above there, there's the drywall, there's the stucco. This comes in 1 unit and it's in there. And once you evaluate all the components together, it's very hard to understand the conventions that guide construction practice. And details count. If you look up, you should see something that pleases you, that makes you see things differently. Short-term hotel, this is fun. If the guys come to LA, we go to the top of the Standard, okay? The top of the Standard is here. And this was the Standard Oil building. For those of you who are older, if you watched Black and White Perry Mason, which I really love, there's a sort of a continuity lapse between the outside of Perry's office and the inside of Perry's office. Well, the outside of Perry's office is definitely this building. But he had a terrace off the side, which is completely impossible. And we ran into the same kind of continuity issues with this building because the front door of the Standard Oil building was here, and it was an office building. And we were not allowed to do drop-off parking along that street. So we had to flip the building so that the entry was from the parking lot. So instead of being a liability, we turned it into an asset because it's kind of this hip back door. And again, it's okay to do things that are historical long as they're from the modern era, because this is as much a riff on the kind of pergola from the 50s as my work on the farmer's market was. I think it's about how you combine things and what the expectation is, and not the actual ornament itself. And here's the thing that made the Standard, which again was Hank's baby, my partner. He said, you're going to have a hotel in LA, you've got to put a pool on the roof. There was no pool on the roof. All the pools on hotels in downtown LA were in the basement. There's some cool ones at the Biltmore, but none of them were up. And it broke all the rules that I told the students about this afternoon, was when you have a small amount of people, you want to get as many people in the same place as possible, so do it on the street. So here you go, a contradiction. But what we learned from this is here's the hotel entrance from the parking lot in the back. You come up here, you go through a lobby, you go up a mezzanine escalator, and then you go to a back elevator, and then you go to the roof. And this is one of the most popular places to go in all of LA. So this shows the sequence of going from back to front instead of front to back. The reception desk is here so that the existing lobby still makes sense. You always end up in the right place. The elevators that take you to the rooms, and the sequence through. The other issue for people working in the case supply warehouse is when you have buildings that were built for offices or for warehouse, they're very deep. And it's very difficult to work out how to fit units into them. And we came up with the large and super large, which were geared for basketball players. It's a long story, but we won't go there. But the best model you have is New York lofts, which really changed the way deep space has been configured. And then the pool at the top. So you go past a garden courtyard to go in. The Kagan, I can't remember the guy's first name. This is Vladimir, yeah. He designed the furniture for the lobby. This is the existing marble. There wasn't enough money to change it out. So anything we kept, we had to make it feel like we wanted to keep it. The existing escalator from the bank that was removed becomes something that people thought was put in to make it cool, because that Playboy aesthetic is what this place is all about, that 60s thing. Going up, and then the bedroom with their exposed bathrooms, which is an interesting breakthrough, because when you're in a bathroom in a hotel, you're either with someone you really like, we hope, or you're alone, which can be okay. Nevertheless, you're locked in those small dark bathrooms, and the idea of borrowing space when you don't have a lot of space to have is really cool. Building pools are not as easy as it looks, but there's the bar, and swimsuits are optional, as I understand it, and night times are a blast, and here she comes. And we thought it was all about the work we did, but it was really all about those vibrating waterbeds. And this is the review. I think one of the things we knew when we got up to the top of the Standard was that there's some particular condition where it feels like the buildings are rotating around the rooftop. And I don't know what causes it, but it's great. And I don't think I'd had a martini yet when I first observed it. And the last building I want to show you is Midrise Mixed Use. And this is in the middle of a competition for the city of West Hollywood between developers. And 94 units an acre again, so you can compare it to that light industrial one that I showed you, which was lower rise. There are also cut-off issues that come up when you get over a number of floors in terms of the building type. So building code starts to drive planning intentions because the cost of construction goes in increments. It doesn't just gradually go up. You know what, I'll add another floor, that's easy. No, you kick into a different building code. That's where the power of knowledge of all this technical stuff comes in handy, because your chances of hitting on something that will actually make change become much greater. And the idea here is that there's a very corny, we seem to be attracted to these sites. This is a kind of corny, slightly modernish outdoor courtyard for a big box retail development, which includes here a Target and a Best Buy. For those of you who like bulk buying, this is a dream location. But your first instinct was, well, this is working, let's make another one. And then we said, wait a minute. To make another one means that you're going to drain people from this and take them over there. It's better that this development is busy and developed than to mimic it. So we said, build to the corner. The idea here was to add a supermarket, possibly. Our client, the developer, had a connection with Whole Foods. That kicks in a whole lot of stuff. And then the idea was to move up the street and change scales a bit as you came to a more residential community. These are all the diagrams, how you kind of move through it. And because I'm focusing on observation rather than analysis, I'm going to skip them. Parking. The difficulties with big box retail are the issues of how you load and unload. Sorry, not big box, supermarkets or big box retail. And then the creation, and in LA you have to be real deliberate about this, because it's kind of like A-grade retail, which gets your national chains. They have certain conditions and what sort of space they want. If you want to get B-grade, you've got to convince your developer. And B-grade doesn't mean it's bad, it just means their credentials are less stellar. And frankly, as many chain people go under as just little businesses go under. But nevertheless, to create spaces that are conducive to smaller businesses and different kinds of experience. The section here is underground parking is the only way to do it. The elevation showing how it changes from scale here. This set forward, this set back, a green screen, and a little courtyard here. So that's a smaller space. And then the corner. Now, this gets to, we have this idea that if it had to be a gateway, we needed something that would be a signature. Yeah, I know we're kind of slightly nifty in the form, but what we came up with was a photoluminescent paint that would be attached to the layer of this. It would absorb the light during the day, and it would be most intense at dusk. By 10 or 11 o'clock, it had faded. So what you would get was this illuminated facade at night that would be quite extraordinary, but cost nothing in terms of the energy use. So it's kind of like trying to do a Times Square number without using any energy. Not as intense, there's nothing, no flashes. We also like the idea of, I told you about voids. I like containers, I like cabinets of wonder, and I like the detritus of living. Admittedly, not everyone can have a beaded barbecue, but the idea of what do you do with that stuff is, as architects, we usually try and pretend it's not going to be there, or we want to screen it. And usually our clients want to screen it. I really like the combination of what happens when you think of those things when you frame them in a certain way. So what you do is you put life on display, which takes us from the sort of the very small where I began to the very big in the middle, and again back to the personal level of inhabitation at the end. And that kind of brings us to, you are here. And through an incredible twist of fate, I have us in the right place. The Case Supply Warehouse, an adjacent piece of land, and the students and Julia was sitting around this afternoon trying to nut out what that meant. If you took, for example, that this is going to happen first, what does that mean for this? And the students are probably going to divide up, and one of pairs, one will take this building and one will take that. with the expectation that these guys call the shots first. And we'll go from there. We've started to think about it. There's people putting up ideas. There are some of you who are quite negative. Try and be positive. It's always nicer. But we're having a really good time. It's an incredible issue. The students identified this knot of stuff that happens and maybe think you should intensify the knot. Others have come up with ideas for fingers of green that follow the track as well as the creek, wherever that creek went, that goes up there, right? So there's all sorts of ideas brewing. We've just started. We've started a comments wall, and we'd like to hear from you if you have ideas. Again, try and keep it positive. And what's good about that is, even when it's negative, it raises the issues that people feel are guiding the discussion. And generally, if you air them and you talk about them, you find that they're not the things that are the controlling issues. They're really about fears of change and control. So you want to let go of this issue of control and all that sort of stuff and think about what would make Syracuse sing, because the consensus of the group is that this building with this in place and plans for other developments coming around and Armory Square stuff moving across, is that this is the catalyst that could turn Syracuse to have a positive self-identity. And if you can do that, that would be brilliant, because it would be a model for shrinking cities in the Northeast that would have incredible value. So no pressure, students, because now my job's over. It's all up to you. I really hope you have a look at the portraits that the students in the group did of people in the neighborhood. They chose someone from the east side and someone from the west side to interview. Well, they walked around and bumped into people, and those people then kindly spoke to them and had their photograph taken. And the anecdotal commentary that comes out is fascinating. So come and have a glass of wine with us, and thank you for listening.
Before we break, I'd like to ask if there are questions. Julie will take a couple of questions, because you're the only thing standing between us and glasses of good Rioja. So
He said it was good. It better be.
I think it's good. This is, you know, an army marches on its stomach. Do we have any questions, Ted?
Julie, question about projected density here relative to other densities that you produce.
Would you mind just repeating the question, Ted, so that others hear us?
I was wondering on the West Side project what the range of projected densities are relative to some of the other projects you showed.
Well, we don't really know what the density will be. So one of the issues you've got to deal with this density factor is the density is a factor of the size of the unit as much as it's the size of the project. So we haven't divided it up and looked at what increment of space is the right size for artists' hub. So if it's 600 square feet, that's a whole lot more units than it's 1,500 square feet. So that number we don't have in hand. The thing that's bothering me about density, so let's just say it's 100 units, dwelling units per acre, which would be like the light industrial. That's my kind of guess. But the issue is how many units you put in one place, and how much you say, you know what, if I want this to really sing, I want people to walk from A to B and have continuous activity, or the sense that, because the students identified this is a whole, it's all gap toothed with parking. How do I move through this community and feel that I'm in a place that people feel belongs to them and they have ownership for? So then you wonder, should you be spreading some of that density along the edges rather than concentrating it in one place and maybe looking at more community uses, maybe with fewer units in that place? These are the kind of things to think about. When we spoke to Mr. Falcone, he actually said that he thought the absorption rate for market rate units was about 100 units in 2 years. Is he here? No. I think it was 100 units in 2 years, because it's really difficult in this town to get this off the ground. I know, talking to Mark, that artists who can get units for free and buy in, that's a whole different market. That's That's a much better captive audience, and I think that's got a lot of potential. But the issue is that this will happen in small pieces. So the question is, do you spread it or do you concentrate it? So the density is really a perceptual thing rather than a real thing. Does that answer? Yeah.
Is there any discussion of mass transportation, light rail, anything like that?
We have the expert here, so I don't have to answer this question. Julia Churnia, along with field operation, is she's fantastic, and she's responsible for fleshing out the connected corridor plan. And they're looking at the transportation, no light rail. Buses? Yes. Train stops could change?
Yes. No,
No light rail. I like light rail, but
Yeah.
yet. Not yet.
not yet.
Is it in the mix at all, or
Pardon?
is it in the mix?
I think, is it a projection? What, I think, Julia, you've got to get me to correct this because I make things up. I think the idea is to do what you have to do to put the bones of this in place. The best thing that could happen to you is in 2.5 years you've outgrown the plan. Do you follow what I'm saying? But to be too ambitious too fast means you get none of the pieces in place. And I'm guessing that that's how you're going about. Thank you.
Yeah, there's one more for Judy.
Yeah.
You mentioned before, Julie, that, it was a question about how many units you can get in the area.
Mhm.
Would the same thing hold true, that you would do just whatever you could do now, and if it changes down the road, you would work something else out? Otherwise, you get nothing.
I've got a mic. I don't have to take it. There are two different kind of things. The marketplace is one thing, and the not-for-profit you guys are talking about. You guys understand what this not-for-profit is doing? I know the people in the class do. But the not-for-profit is modeled on a program in Paducah, Tennessee. Kentucky. You know, it's a big country. And what they did was that they took delinquent tax properties and offered them to artists around the nation, generally big city artists like New York, LA, Chicago, who could not buy their way into the marketplace. Said, here's a safe haven where you can build some equity for very little money down. Actually, no money down. And he got a whole lot of ducks in a row so this could happen. So this is something where people with very limited means get to buy into the dream. That's a whole different category of thing. That I would be as ambitious about as I could be. But when you're talking about market rate, there's nothing worse than a whole lot of for sale signs up in a neighborhood where you can't get the people in there. So the issue is to make it feel like it's growing and it's moving, but not to do something that's stupid because to shoot yourself in the foot. So does that?
Yeah.
Well,
Any other questions over down there?
you can tell who wants to get a class.
Okay, it's wine time.
Okay, thank you very much.